This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. We're on the computer. Hello, and welcome to this month's Chthonia Conversations. I'm your host, Breege Burke. This month, I'm really pleased to have David Beth. So we've scheduled this a few times, haven't we? David is the other half of Theion Publishing. We had Jessica Grote last month. David is involved with what is known as the Cosmic Gnosis current within esoteric kind of current tradition, and also is a voodoo involved with voodoo, is voodoo priest. So welcome, David.
Hello, very good to be there. Yeah, we have rescheduled a lot. Thank God it happened. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yes, I know. I've been. We've kind of, I think we chatted in person in March, and then kind of fell off from there. But
Globetrotters.
Yes, yeah, exactly. We've both been had quite busy schedules over the last few months. So this what the subject of this is kind of interesting, because normally for these talks I have a specific topic in mind. I talk about so for example, Jessica and I talked about a Hatira, or we talk about I've talked about Chode practice and the Gnostic feminine. This one's a little more complex because we are actually I'm interested in a lot of this has to do with the Cosmic Gnosis current and this sort of idea about the way in which we think about time, the way we think about chaos, and also the way we think about this idea of the soul versus the spirit, which actually, as abstract as that sounds to a lot of people, I think that's actually quite fundamental to when you're dealing with what I call the masculine feminine split on the most the most meta level, I guess you could say, right? So really what we need to do is probably start with some things I want to talk about. Have to give some background first, because there's a lot of people, it's not, unless they specifically know your work, they may not have any idea, like what's this about? What are we talking about? So so we can, so I think, and I sort of want to look at it in three different parts. I think I want to talk about this kind of creation time view, what we call the Pelasgian view of things. And then I want to also look at, that soul versus spirit question. And then specifically in currents like this one, and other currents that might have to do with what we call, like Saturnian currents having to do with Saturn, this idea, which we'll talk about in a minute. Just kind of looking at constructs of the feminine and the difficulties with that. So those are kind of the three main things that I have in my mind for this talk. So I guess the first place I want to start then is just this idea. Now, the books that I actually was looking at with regard to this, this is just for the listeners' benefit. There's of Cosmogonic Eros, which is by Ludwig Klages, which I know is a very important. That's a very dense work. And actually, Theion does actually have a newer edition of that out. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, yeah, and it's actually a very interesting read on this subject. And connected to that is a Chthonic Gnosis. That's another work that's put out by Theion that kind of gives an explanation of Klages and kind of distills it down in a very more understandable kind of a way. And then also there's another Theion book, Cult of the Black Cube, which I think is now going in its second edition as well.
Third edition.
Wow. Okay, right. That's right. Yeah, I have the second edition, right? There's a third one. Yeah, right. I have the, and you had done an essay on that about this particular kind of thing. So this is sort of what I'm drawing from to ask these questions. So the first thing we talk about, and Klages talks about this as well, is what they calls the Pelasgian worldview. I know what my definition of that is just from studying classical mythology, but it seems to be this kind of movement from chaos expressed as a mother and then expressed as a son, this kind of biocentric view incorporating life and death, which as I've just said, this sounds incredibly abstract. So if you could explain, this idea of so I think it's kind of fundamental, this idea about chaos and about time. Can you explain a little bit about that before we jump into anything else?
Yeah, well, I think we do have then to unpack quite a few more complex sounding topics, although I hope that when we actually start talking about it, we can actually pull them down to a very understandable level and see how they actually manifest in, everyday perception, everyday life. So, yeah, you mentioned Ludwig Klages was very important to my own work, and Cosmic Eros to me, the book you mentioned, is literally the book that changed my entire esoteric life, you could say, because it introduces a type of metaphysical thinking, or it's actually not even post metaphysics in a sense, but it introduces a type of interpretation of the world and of experience and of life, which I have never found anywhere else, and very convincingly argues about why the world is as it is today, why we see the problems in the world as they are, and how we could possibly remedy them, and what an alternative looks like. And so this is a very intense book, dealing also with a lot of esoteric matters like ancestral worship, and explaining how the ancients looked at things versus the modern human beings. So the term Pelasgian, when I use it, I do use it sometimes, actually is derived from the way Klages understands it. And while, of course, the term may be familiar to historians of religion from, like you just mentioned it, ancient Greek studies, the Pelasgians were some proto-Greek people who were kind of a mythical people that nobody really knows anything about, but who were supposedly worshipping nameless gods, kind of nature gods, who were pre-Olympian type of deities. And Klages actually refers to the Pelasgians just because of that, but just because it kind of like links him back to some type of primordial antique time before history, while at the same time aiming at a time that is just at the dawn of history. And when he speaks about the Pelasgians, he also understands people like poets, or modern day poets, or people like certain type of painters like Böcklin, or people like that, poets like Hölderlin, or even Nietzsche to a degree. He understands such people to also embody the Pelasgian reality. So Pelasgian to him is not just an historical people that he refers to, but it's a kind of primordial consciousness, which in ancient times was kind of like prevalent in human beings and in societies, and is now only manifested in a few gifted individuals who have a type of pathic, visionary quality in which to live their lives. So so this basically, and so when Klages speaks about the Pelasgians and how they experience their lives, you mentioned chaos. He basically speaks about the Pelasgians as people who experience their world as not created by some creator God who then gives moral commandments and basically gives revelations and binds his people to those types of revelations and commandments. But basically, he believes that the Pelasgians, and here he refers also to Bachofen and his work. So Klages draws inspiration from there as well. Let's not forget that. So basically, Klages believes that the Pelasgians, or primordial people, and even tribal people today to a very large degree, still experience the world as something that was not created but born, and born in a sense not that you really pay attention to creation myth. Is not so much that the creation myth itself is so important, but actually what derives from that, so he believes that in a worldview or in a world experience where a world has been created, there is a type of logos, or a type of ordering from above. The world and its society and its experience is ordered from top to bottom. from the creator God down to human beings and everything in between. And he believes that the Pelasgian experience is something that's not ordered from above, but where basically life is polarized into complementaries, where there is no ordering from top to bottom, but that each human being, but also every other ensouled phenomenon, and Klages would say that every phenomenal appearance is also ensouled, which means that the entire world, so that's you could say an animist position, where basically everything that exists in the world has a soul, and its phenomenal appearance is the manifestation of that soul. So body and soul here are a type of unit which kind of like pertain to each other. The one is the other, and have a kind of effect on each other. So he believes then in this type of world, in the Pelasgian world, in a born world, there is a ceaseless interaction of complementaries and polarities. And through this interaction, the world is experienced. So there is no top to bottom order, which then our mind relates to, but it's another type of relating to the world through a type of ecstatic communication, you could say, with your environment. And this means that the Pelasgians, or the people even before the Pelasgians, would have the ability to open themselves up to the cosmic experience to a degree where the external forces can impact on you, whether that's the rain, whether that's a mountainside, whether that's another human being, or anything you potentially encounter is not encountered as an other, which you have to analyze and basically dominate in order to understand and reflect back on yourself. But it is something that through its power of, or through its enthusing power, can basically impact on you if you have that openness, which allows this impact to take place. And for Klages, this is the soul, which allows that connection to be made, where the outer enthuses and the inner conceives and receives. And when this receiving happens, it's literally like a conception. And from that conceiving of the external influence arises arises a world, arises an image, arises an activity. So basically, to make it much more easy, a person that lives in the world and is able to communicate with the outside in that open way, where he's open for those influxes, he is able to basically operate from a position of mutual understanding and mutual connectivity, rather than from a position of trying to submit, conquer, exploit, and dominate what he's encountering, and basically deconstructing what he is encountering. The modern mind versus the Pelasgian mind tries to objectify what he's encountering and tries to actually submit it to human use or human analysis, or human conception in that utilitarian sense, in order to assert himself or herself. And this is a completely different approach to what you encounter in the world, in contrast to people, indigenous people that you still have today, Pelasgians of the past, or anyone who is open enough to encounter the world in a pathic type of way. But I'm sure we're going to deconstruct it even more because of this.
No, it's interesting, and I mean, I think that was a very good explanation, obviously, of that way of thinking. And yeah, and as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about because when you think about the relationships, even about religion, about modern religion, and the way that people approach, which I've always kind of associated with say the coming of Christianity, you actually go back even farther and say, no, this is actually like as when you get to the Olympians, because certainly once you have this idea of a state religion and a state deity that has to be appeased in a certain way, it's, now you have gotten into something that's very highly rationalistic. Okay, you're trying to rationalize. It's about the ego, right? It's about the I, and it's not about your connection to that, to what's out there.
Klages would probably say like that the development or the strengthening of the I and was then of course the root of creation of monotheistic gods. It was the projection of the ego into the pseudo-objective space, and then creating that type of super ego, uber ego image of a god, which then basically is of course kind of an anthropomorphic figure that passes down commandments to chosen people. So that's exactly what it is like,
And what's interesting about you saying that, yes, is that this anthropomorphic, which also tends to make people, first of all, I think that's Platonic, right? We get that Plato, right. and we get the philosophers. Humanism, it's this right. idea that somehow gods are in our image. People always talk about ancient gods as though, oh, well, they're really just glorified people. And it's like, well, they're not. It is something different from you that you interact with in a different way. They're not just people with superpowers, but right. that's the way that people tend to look at or look at God in a very, very personal way, since the biblical view, this is about,
right. No. And that's also what modern pagans, that's exactly what they do when they kind of resort back to paganism. They don't realize that actually they haven't at all a pagan view on the gods, but what they're actually doing is taking a very Christian idea of what a god is or what God is like, and kind of like transported onto whatever god they're choosing to work with, and it becomes like their little friends and their buddies, and it becomes this kind of like weird hybrid, which is like a toy store. And has nothing really to do with any type of pagan experience. It's a completely anthropocentric and logocentric experience, which is then just sold under the header of paganism or neo-paganism or neo-animism as the exact same thing. They fail to understand that it's a type of predisposition of the soul and a way of experience which renders someone pagan or anthropocentric or logocentric, and it's not a choice of deities. Obviously, the conscious choice of deities doesn't make you a pagan or like in the ancient sense, or a non-pagan.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, exactly, because the relationship, I always think about this term, and I know a lot of times people misunderstand when I say it. I've had people, but when I talk about the idea of say the pact, there's, and I don't necessarily mean it's it can be kind of a you give me this and I give you that kind of a thing, but it's kind of, to me, it's more fundamental than that. It's more about the relationship that you forge with these forces, but it's not a personal relationship. It's not that same kind of a thing at all. And yeah, that is an interesting thing that I've thought about with modern paganism, is that I feel like it's just, you've taken the other paradigm and you've just kind of, place it on top of this, now we're talking about, Artemis or Hecate, or we're talking about, instead of talking about Yahweh, or Jehovah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And everybody, and every god is, to every person what they want it to be. There is no, they try to, they conceptualize the gods and goddesses they deal with in such an infantile way. That's not even that the conceptualizing is of course, that's one problem, but they even conceptualize it to such an infantile degree that on top of it is funny and pathetic. And, and it's, however, of course, it reflects the modern mentality of like everything goes, anything goes, whatever makes me happy is okay. And of course, by doing that, they're fulfilling that type of logocentric development, which people like Klages, Heidegger, and other people have, of course, predicted. That this type of the strengthening of the conceptualizing mind, where the outside is not anymore allowed to unfold in whatever way it must. but it's you who kind of like imposes a certain idea and a certain concept and a certain hopes, dreams, wishes, ideas on top of an artificially constructed, maybe like an egregore or something like that, that you create. Of course, they don't have the power to create an egregore, but because for that they even would have to know what it would mean. But what it means, it becomes nothing but a projected thought form, which then, of course, makes their lives maybe a little bit more interesting or a little bit more fun. But it doesn't have magical powers. It doesn't have any type of meaning other than making their lives a little bit more colorful and giving them some type of deeper meaning for their own lives, maybe.
Or an identity, yeah.
And an identity. But of course, for real esotericists or philosophers or people who are more sophisticatedly engaged with these matters, this is an absolutely irrelevant type of activity. And however, it is always necessary to speak about it, but because of course the occulture has become such a mainstream phenomenon, with all the TikTok witches and all the, everybody is a witch now, everybody is a pagan now, everybody is occult now, everybody's esoteric now. It's that kind of like, the death of God that Nietzsche proclaimed created a type of nihilism, and out of this nihilism arose the need to fill it with meaning. And what happens now is, paganism or any type of esoteric concept has become one of the many, 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 many distractions of humanity, which is used to kind of like make their lives more meaningful. And by doing that, they completely bypass the actual task that the current world or the current situation in the world spiritually or metaphysically would demand. The kind of like breaking through to that what Heidegger called an enframing, or or what Klages would call this highly accelerated logocentrism, that kind of insulation of human beings in that rational mindset, in that technological mindset. This type of situation is not grasped. And for me, and that is why, of course, when I talk about esotericism and occultism, is completely apart from, of course, that lifestyle esotericism, which we talk about here sometimes, right? Because I'm concerned and interested in, solving those types of problems, seeing what the problems are from a metaphysical perspective and what has to be done in order to improve the situation or bypass certain trappings in order to regain a type of freedom which we have lost a long time ago.
Well, exactly. Yeah, and that's an important question, and it's an important consideration, which is, why I think one of the reasons I've been really drawn to the writings that you have and the writings that Theion has put out, because I think that's in a way that's probably from a different angle. That's what I'm trying to do with this channel and with the stuff that I'm doing over here is trying to look at things in that different kind of a way. And it's it's still working in this paradigm. Yes, it's a very rational paradigm. It's very much driven. And then that's where you talk about people who feel that engaging in these kinds of pagan, we'll call them in quotes, activities is going to somehow get rid of their problems, or somehow this is going to, and it's like, no, it's like any kind of legit path is that there's work that's involved, and the work begins immediately. As soon as you get on the path, no matter what drew you into it, what was alluring about it, you immediately start and you realize, oh crap, there's a lot of work involved here. But it's a work that you really, if you really do it, then you really, it's kind of worth the effort. But I think a lot of people think that, like you just said, it's the bypassing. You think that you can just,
right. And to do the work and to walk on the path, one first has to understand what the path actually is. And and to me personally, the path is not to follow some kind of prescribed rules that someone has created, yes, well, there can be initiatory steps one has to take. But what I mean is like, when it's like, oh, I'm a pagan and I follow whatever Hecate. So now my path is to, I don't know, build an altar to Hecate, do path working, go into meditation, and when I feel good about things, and then she speaks to me. Or like, I close my eyes and I hear a voice, and now she speaks to me, and now I'm like a friend of Hecate, So the question is, what is the path? So for me, a part of sophisticated occultism is also a Gnostic question, in the sense we have to ask ourselves, what, if at all, and of course, my position is, if we don't see that we live in a world that creates an insulation which basically doesn't allow us to break through to a kind of strata where a type of polytheist, animist, whatever you want to call it, connection is possible, then I think already I would be in complete disagreement with these people, because I believe, just like Bataille, like Klages, I believe that there is a faculty, let's call it the mind, let's call it the spirit, or whatever you want to call it, the rational faculty, self-conscious, egocentric mind, which prevents a kind of world experience which I would consider to be polytheist, pagan, because pagan in that sense that it's non-monotheistic, or it's non-logocentric. So something within us prevents that from happening. So even if we declare ourselves polytheist or pagan or this or that, and we follow some kind of self-prescribed or prescribed from outside steps, we still operate within a completely logocentric mindset and reality. All our experiences will be only sensible within a logocentric referential framework. So this means that we have to first, especially as people, as Westerners, and I don't mean Westerners only people who live in the West. The Western culture or the Western mindset has spread all over the world. So, don't celebrate if you live in Africa or in Asia or somewhere else, because this rational Western mindset is the dominant mindset everywhere in the world, except if you live in some kind of indigenous tribe in the Amazon, maybe. Or in some other places where, the logocentric mind has not yet penetrated so strongly, but that creates other problems, because people are drawn between different kind of mentalities, and which actually makes it much harder for them, because the logocentric mind has dominated the world, and as you can't operate in it, you go under. That's another problem if we see. Yes. So, however, back to the issue is, unless you understand that we have a Gnostic situation here, where, two different world experiences combat and battle each other for the supremacy of how we relate to the world, we cannot go on the path if we consider our path to be anything like animist, polytheistic in a very primordial sense. Or if we consider, or if we want to do anything that's non-logocentric, meaning like, that we abide to a transcendental path. So if we want to experience anything that's kind of like a Chthonic path for us, or a kind of like a cosmic path versus a transcendental path, we need to understand that we have to first break through a certain type of insulation, because if we don't, we cannot have it. That's my firm position, because just by choosing consciously the one or the other is meaningless. It's right. This is like choosing me. I want to be, Usain Bolt, or I want to be like, so I can choose to be that, but I'm still not going to be that, because obviously, I'm missing some faculty there,
running very fast.
Running very fast. There you go.
Right.
So, I guess this was not really a good example, but, in general, you understand my point, right? The point is, just by choice and declaration, this is the and this, by the way, is the typical strategy of the modern human. We want something and we assert dominance. We take it. We take it under our control. We want to dominate it. We want to be sovereign. In that kind of sense, sovereignty for us and freedom means domination and meaning control. Because this is the way we combat nihilism, combat the idea of finitude. You know, we're the only species, of course, that know that we're going to die. So that creates anxiety, and that anxiety then triggers this type of also mindless or frantic pursuit of control, even though it's futile. So, however, this is the dominating human agency, you know, to control everything, and by doing that, deconstructing everything and taking everything out of its own context, and anthropomorphing basically the world. The world becomes a resource. Other people become a resource. Everything has to be recreated in our image or for our image, you know. And this is the demystifying and de-sacralizing of the world in its most fundamental way. And this is when people like I don't know, Hölderlin and Heidegger say they're the fugitive gods, the gods who are who leave the place, you know, who leave the stage, because humans don't allow them any more place to dwell. Humans are no longer able to hear the gods, and so the gods flee. And what we create instead is a fantasy land of perceived gods that don't exist, because, you know, we assign them meaning from artificial in artificial ways. And this is something that I very strongly feel, and which I very strongly try to solve and oppose in my own work. And unless someone is able to come to the work with such sophistication, let's call it, with that also a type of motivation to really do transformative work. I have absolutely zero interest in working with these people, because, you know, there are a million self-help books, a million books to contact this goddess, this god, that, do this, do that, primers 101, you know, of this. And I have zero interest in that, you know. That may sound elitist to some, but I think this is the job that has to be done if you want to have real results. And many people that I admire agree with me, you know, from Bataille to Klages to Heidegger to Hölderlin and others, you know. So I'm in good company, even if the modern world would probably reject this type of approach, because today, be what you want to be, and who can say no, right?
Well, right. Well, exactly. Yeah, there's definitely there's definitely that kind of a thing. It's interesting. Because we're talking about this, and yeah, the whole idea of the ordered universe. Okay, so if you go back to like, I think about teaching mythology, and I think about teaching Greek mythology versus biblical mythology versus other things, and there's always this idea of measurement, of separation, of control, of this idea of taking something. Even the first appearances of Kronos, okay, in Greek mythology. I mean, Kronos is the god of time. He, you know, takes the sickle and, you know, cuts the connection between between the sky and the earth, right? There's this idea of you know, and life as we experience it, of course, as we experience it in this kind of very, very separate kind of a way. But then you also have these kinds of mythologies like the Chthonic and things like that, which are about you know, basically order overcoming chaos.
Right.
Okay. And the fact that this is the way our like you said, this is the Western worldview. This is the way our minds are constructed. And so, you know, one of the big questions, and I know I've seen some of what Klages has said about the possibilities of answering this, is about how does one, when that kind of mindset is sort of in your, I don't know, for lack of better, in your DNA. I mean, it's just, it's so hard to get outside of it, because you never see what the alternative is. You know what I mean? It's very, very hard to pull oneself out of the rational mindset, as much as one perhaps knows, because in a way, like you were talking about all these other things, you know, the way in which we impose and dominate. And I'm saying, yeah, and we also dissect. You know,
absolutely.
You dissect, you overanalyze, you take things, you know, every single experience has to be interpreted and taken apart. And it's maddening. And but there is not a you cannot it's not, you can't do this by affirmation. You can't just declare to yourself, oh, I'm going to stop thinking this way. I mean, I've met so many people who have that attitude of just like, well, like the spiritual shamers, the ones who will say like, well, it's your life is this way because it's your fault. If you're suffering from anxiety or depression, it's all your fault because you're just thinking your way into this. And I'm like, you really give rationality way too much credit, because rationality might be like, what, 10% of it. I mean, it's just not. There's so much there that people are not connecting with. And I don't know.
Of course, 99% of what happened, we don't even realize. Obviously, you still breathe and you don't think about every breath you take, right?
Exactly.
Your organs, pump and work, and you have no control over it, but it's still a function that is inside your body. Of course, 90%, I guess, of what we experience is not controllable by our rational mind, and it evades our conscious perception, right?
Well, even people who have used their rational mind. I mean, we talk about a rationalization, right? I mean, what do people do? They take the ideas that they have, the scripts that they have played over, and they have decided that this is the way the world is, and this is the way the world is construction, and they do it over and over again, and it just becomes a way to. They just use their mind to kind of justify those scripts, even though they may not even be valid. You know what I mean?
Of course, because everything is only a theory. This is all theoretical, and even if these theories are very sound, but if you go back to the beginning, it's nothing can be proven in that sense, right? But you can see, and the more, however, people construct these theoretical worlds and these rational worlds in which they move, the more the need for control arises, because it becomes more complicated and more complex all the time, more detailed all the time. And of course, it falls apart here, it falls apart there. Of course, people who have this constant need to control their lives in order to feel safe, to feel at ease, create that kind of anxiety within them more than anyone else, because obviously, at any time, that complex, rationally created logical world in which you understand will fall apart. I mean, we saw it in the pandemic, right? I mean, the typical saturated European and American, suddenly was like completely flipped out because they couldn't, I don't know, pre-plan the next 6 months. And especially also the Americans, where even in your job, you have to have targets, you have to prognose what's the next 6 months you're going to work like, what are
your goals and objectives,
exactly, how much you're going to turn around for us, and no. So suddenly that type of futuristic endeavor, that also that linear timeline which we live for as rational people was taken a little bit out of its usual path, which of course, when you speak to people who live in much worse conditions, they just laugh at this. Oh my God, people couldn't plan their holidays in the next 6 months. Oh God, people didn't know, how their situation is going to be in 6 months, or 1 year. And it was mainly because you had to sit at home and had to wear a mask. And, now suddenly your liberty was dependent on wearing a mask or not. My God, this is, and you can see how much imbalances this has created. And that's just because, your rationally constructed logical world of good and evil, of right or wrong, of how it's going, how it should be like, that progress that never ends, the solutions that can be found for any problem suddenly kind of fell apart just a little bit. And just this little bit was enough to create outright panic in most people. And now we have the same in Europe, of course, then now we have the gas issues and the energy problems and like this and I guess the modern world, the Western world now learns a little bit how it is to live in more uncertain times and world. And that creates, of course, massive anxieties because we are used to solving, conquering, explaining, and making sense of things. And if we cannot make sense of something, it's dangerous, it's evil, it's not good. And this is, you can also if things If people do not agree, if that doesn't make sense, it's evil, it's not okay, it's whatever it is, it just has to be eradicated. So it's this type of mentality that is, in my opinion, a very big stumbling block to any type of spiritual development.
It's funny that you bring that up, because that is just that is I could really go down that rabbit hole. I mean, I won't in this particular conversation.
Yeah, we don't need to, because because it's logical in that sense. You know, if you're into logic, then think about it and you come to the conclusion.
And yeah, the uncertainty factor, that's a big one, I think. I remember Alan Watts had once said that people that certain modes of thinking, whether they be religious or scientific, are successful because it's a matter of how predictable they are. Like how much predictability does it give you about the future? In other words, you don't want to take any step until you are assured of what every outcome is going to be.
Right.
And to me, I have always felt that what's more important, and the kind of work that I do too, is just how do you learn to live with uncertainty? How do you learn to go through every day and not feel like you have to know exactly where everything's going to end up? Cause and effect are really certainly even the rationalistic philosophers have proved that cause and effect is not necessarily how it works. You know what I mean?
100%. I agree with you 100%. A life that is designed to control the entire surroundings and your entire life from the start, and to have a safe life where everything works out. This, of course, is first of all impossible. We all have our setbacks. Even the most careful pre-planners cannot predict, if their girlfriend's going to break up with them one day or whatever. And you know what? They constantly live in fear. Mm-hmm. So the funny thing is, while they try to kind of like create a good future for themselves with happiness and prosperity, what they're oftentimes are doing is, of course, creating massive anxieties on the way, and they never arrive in the future because the future is always ahead of you, right? So while they're going along, the anxieties always remain, and even if it's good while they're doing it, they're still thinking it's good now, but it may not be good in the future. So the anxieties never end, right? Because that bad moment may always come. And then, of course, the more complex your life is, the more, of course, you're afraid of what could happen. And then, of course, we live in a world where, there's a kind of like undiscriminating equality, in also a very bad sense, where everyone wants everyone to be the same and nobody can stick out. So that we can see, for example, in that problematic excesses of cancel culture, which started as a sane movement, in my opinion, of course, but had excessive, went to excesses like the Jacobins, where suddenly it's like, if you don't think like me, if you don't think like us, you have to be, put a notch down by any means, because it threatens our well-being, it threatens our mental state, it threatens our well-being, or our way of life, or way of mind. And this type of knowledge, where we are constantly connected with everyone, every little meaningless thing can suddenly become a huge shitstorm that may threaten your entire existence, because that kind of mob mind decides that we have to take people a notch down. It's what Nietzsche would call probably the rage of the resentful. The small people who want their little life to be cozy, everybody happy, everybody fine, because that's that humanist ideal of like, everybody is the same, we're all happy, and nobody has to struggle or fight for anything, because that's a human right, everybody nice and happy. But to achieve this, you have to constantly burn people down, and that's the irony here, right?
Yeah, right.
To achieve the equality of everyone, you constantly have enemies that you can pinpoint as the problematic. It's like the witch hunts,
sacrificial scapegoats. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the witch hunts, right? Like, we all want to be Christians, we all want to have the second coming of Christ, but we can't have it because we could all be so happy and live in Christ, but we can't do it because there's some people who are doing the wrong thing.
That's right.
And suddenly those are singled out. So of course, this is a little bit black and white, but you get. I'm just doing this to illustrate an idea, like to illustrate a broad movements in society and in consciousness. And of course, if you are able, let's say, to come to terms with your finitude, that if you can come, and this is what you've referred to, when you spoke about, I think in the beginning, just quickly about how the living and the dead, how this kind of cyclical worldview operates, that you have a certain idea that your finitude is nothing bad. To die is not at all something to be afraid of. It is, you just only have to be afraid of living a shallow life. That's what people were afraid of, that their life is not, heroic or honorable or whatever you call it. And it was not the death itself that was bad. Today, we are afraid to die because, it's something uncertain and, it's something that we have no control over. So it remains our greatest anxiety. And this is also because we, of course, have entered a mentality and a worldview that's linear, not cyclical.
That's right.
So, if we don't understand how the living and the dead basically, mutually sustain each other in that sense. And I'm not even talking in of course, an infantile sense, that, I don't know, my old grandmother floats around as my old grandmother and talks to me every day. So, but those ancestors who lived a deep life, who left something profound, because of the way they lived, that this type of example poses a type of task for the later generations to respect that type of ancestors and basically take the charge in their time and in their historical period to live a life that is heroic, honorable, whatever you want to call it, in that deepest sense of the term, where rather than caring for your own egocentrical future by anxiety or by conquering anxieties, and thus by conquering everything in the world, by deconstructing everything and by bringing everything under your oppressive control. One should look back at the ancients or tribal societies where a good life is actually lived in openness towards the world, where a type of integrative life and letting things be, which is a very, very important thing if you really think of it in a deep philosophical way, which is what the Westerners cannot do. We cannot let things be within themselves. We cannot let them be within their embedment, because we have to take control of them. But if we let them be, if we understand our own limits, our limits as a species, for example, if we understand how, Heidegger has this idea of the fourfold, how, the earth and the sky correspond, and the gods and man, how they correspond, and how this creates a kind of world in which, when you let things be and when you retain a certain openness, when you come to terms with finitude, that then there comes a certain type of serenity and a certain type of activity that's based on fateful action, where you understand what fate means, that you're fated to die and that you cannot escape that fate, and that you are a human being, which also puts limitations on you. But at the same time, this means not resignation, but it means accepting the task that the world has put before you in the time in which you live, meaning that in the time in which you live, in my personal interpretation, it means that you live an integrating life where you let the world be as it is, that you let other people be as they are, while at the same time minimizing your anxieties and understanding the issues which we face. And when one does that, and of course, this is a very simple way of explaining a very hard task, we are less prone to this type of anxious need to control, this anxious need to dominate other people, the world, the environment, the planet. And we don't have to invest our hopes and dreams only in scientific, technological solutions, but we can also fall back on ourselves and not be anxious about it, and we can confront the world without fear. And that's a big part of my own work.
Yeah, and that's it's funny. That's something that I've learned quite a bit of, at least even in the last 6 months, about just letting all that go, because it's a hard kind of mindset to get out of. And I'm also having flashbacks to my undergrad years when I had to read Being in Time for
Right.
Heidegger's.
Oh.
God, we had to read the whole. Yeah, I had to read and teach a
Well,
chapter.
it explodes my brain when I read that, but I like Heidegger's later thoughts because they tend to be more practical,
Mhm.
and I think he also was aware that without any kind of practical application, it's kind of meaningless. But I like his big picture. His big task was, and people get caught up in Heidegger's, oh, what did he say politically, or what? And this is typically modern human beings, right?
Mhm.
We do not look at the big picture of what he actually tried to say or what he actually tried to philosophically highlight, but we get caught up in whether he was a bad boy or a good boy, whether it was good or evil judgments, and that takes away from the big project that Heidegger had as his task, which I think was basically to open humanity up for a more pathic, like Klages, for a more pathic engagement with the universe, where we understand that our rational technological mind deconstructs the world to a degree where we are no longer able to be open towards the enthusing powers, the gods in his case, which give, when they enthuse us, basically fill us with the destiny of the cosmos, and that we then, as actors, as being the one who are enthused and then acting in accord with that intoxication by the universe, then act as manifestors of cosmic destiny. Maybe you could say it like that in a more poetic way. And this is something, at least that's my task. And maybe I kind of like, too poetically interpret Heidegger, but that's not my problem. My only care for Heidegger or anyone in that for that matter is how can I use some of their important work to highlight some of the central things that I want to bring across. And Klages and Heidegger, at least both, were people who stood in for a new type of openness versus control, a type of more passive stance, but passive not as in weak. When we hear passive immediately, and we probably come to that in a little while, it's like, oh, that's feminine. Oh,
yep.
Passive is the feminine, and that's bad, right? That's a negative thing. Oh, to be passive, especially, oh my God, in America, where everyone like, oh, you're passive. Oh, you grab your luck by the neck and you make it happen. Like, don't let anyone tell you what to do. You are the, I don't know, forger of your own.
Even academic writing. I mean, I was thinking about that the other day, is that, one of the things they tell you don't ever speak in passive voice. You always speak in active. You always have to be, you always have to say what you're going to do.
Dominance,
That's right. Exactly.
That's right. Yeah. So there you go. You have to do that. So, and this is what it is, however, in some moments, that's of course maybe necessary, and to be sometimes active is also not a problem. But the problem is that we, in a broad philosophical or metaphysical, in a broad meaning, that if we fail to become able to listen, to open ourselves up, because we are constantly concerned with asserting dominance, and this is where I, for example, completely part ways with Nietzsche. I believe that Nietzsche was one of the greatest visionaries of all times, probably the greatest, who had such a great understanding of the human mind and status quo back in and the declaring the death of God was brilliant, because that's what actually happened. Humanity has actually had decapitated all meaning from their lives. However, the will to power is the exact wrong assumption that arises from that. Because basically the theory of the will to power is basically the apotheosis of what he tried to criticize, right? So out of the nihilism, out of the meaninglessness of the world, you do not come out by suddenly basically casting yourself as the ultimate will to power, and by ordering, anxiously all your drives and needs, but by opening yourself up to the cosmos and try to basically commune with the powers that are outside of you. And when I say powers, you can even understand it in a non-sentimental way as, anything that you confront in the natural world has a potentially overcoming power. We have all experienced this in love, when we have love for another person, or when we sit, in front of a beautiful sunset where we kind of lose ourselves in it for a while, right? Even in music and stuff like that, where when we are transported out of our mundane mind, these are the moments when we are not in control, right?
Right.
And the will to power, or any of these types of approaches where we are frantically try to assert even more control, is, in my opinion, of course, the absolutely wrong strategy to live a more fulfilled, deep, and even heroic life. Because, of course, the one who feels power and who is not anxious is not the one who needs to control. Right? The person who needs to control and dominate all the time is the one who fears something, obviously. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to control anything. Or you feel lack. You feel some type of lack that you need to fill, because only when you have lack, you need to overcome someone or something in order to gain and to possess it. And so to come back into our power is not about, is not by frantically conquering, asserting our dominance, which never ends, because there's always someone stronger, always someone threatening, but is to listen and to become open again in that non-insulated way, which then enables us, to live life in a much more ecstatic and deep way. That said, yeah, go ahead.
No, go. Finish what you're going to say, because I was going to move on to a different
thought. That said, however, that sounds very romantic, but that said, doesn't mean that one doesn't have to sometimes combat opposition, because, as romantic as that sounds, we live in a world, however, that's dominated by people who are obviously living the will to power to the full extent. This is what the capitalist society is like. And even those altruists who pretend they're doing it, I don't know, whatever, for the greater good, oh yeah, we don't want, environmental destruction. So now our will to power is to, I don't know, burn every SUV in the street, is another type of, if we follow ideologies, and type of abstract goals, whether we declare them necessary or it doesn't matter. We will always be confronted, as even if we want to live this more ecstatic, pathic type of open life, we will always be, of course, confronted in this modern world with people who want to put the foot down on us, And that means, however, of course, that this needs to be opposed as well. And this is where a fusion, of course, between the spirit and the soul must come into play, where we must assert, where we must sometimes fight for our freedom and our ability to live in that more pathic, ecstatic, ensouled, chthonic life by using the strategies of the enemy against itself.
And actually,
this is just how it goes.
We just actually, since you've that's, well, like I was going to segue into something different, but I think this is probably a good point to talk about, because that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about with soul versus spirit, because we talk about that. I think the way that we're looking at the soul then is something that is more, as you said, more sort of intrinsic. It's sort of paired with the body. It's more about our life force, our will, about our sort of more authentic, natural kind of existence versus spirit. And I think there's a lot of people who assume soul and spirit are, you're talking about the same thing, but we're not.
Exactly right. I mean, this is very important because, of course, sometimes they're used interchangeably or something like this. When I say soul, I try to make it super easy. Now, of course, it's also a very complicated or complex topic, as most of the things, if you really investigate them in its depth, right? Which is actually great, which shows, that if someone has, if you have nothing to say, it's very shallow and very easy. But of course, if you probe deeper, you can see who's got something interesting to say. You can always find more layers and more layers of an important thing. So anyways, I believe the soul is, of course, it's when we follow Klages, and I do here, when he says the soul or the body is the manifestation of the soul. And when I say body, I mean phenomenal appearance. So when the body is the manifestation of the soul, and the soul is the meaning of the living body, then we get an idea of what it means. So when we also believe or understand that the world is a non-static, always moving and becoming process, because that's what life is. Life never stands still. I'm not the same person today than I was yesterday. Even my molecules have changed. So, nothing in the world is static. However, of course, Plato first, or I guess maybe not first, but one of the first. And then, the more you move into modern times, you find that static superior being, or that static superior, well, even nothingness sometimes, right? Which then trickles down into this transient reality. And of course, transient, becoming, these things are considered negative when compared to the unchangeable, unmoving being, which of course then is the role model of everything. So the soul, however, is that which participates and aligns and relates to the transient, because we are transient. We are constantly changing, metamorphosing, and moving individuals, let's say. But so is the mountainside, so is the landscape, so is a flower, so are other people, and so is our body. Our body is not the same either. So I would say the soul is basically our participation in the ever-becoming life process, or life itself. It's an event in a sense. And our body is the manifestation of it. Through the body, we can gain access to the soul, also in others. So, and when I say body or phenomenal appearance, it's also something like space, for example, is the body of time. Or, the dream content is the soul of the dream, which is its body, or, so one has to see it also on that level. It's not just a material, right, physical, tangible or something, So this is what it is. And the spirit relates to that unmoving, unchanging zone of being, the transcendental, that which never changes, and that which we have also in our metaphysical setup, let's say, which has invaded human beings at one point, or which life has driven out, or evolution has produced, that there is this, that feeling of I am that everyone shares. I used to give, like many years ago, before my conversion to that, cosmic, Chthonic view of things. I gave classes in Gnosticism. How do I discover, my transcendental self? How do I overcome my transient, cosmic prison, or prison self, right?
It's same, yeah.
Exactly. So I used to give like classes how to do that, how to realize this I am, that we all share, and failing to realize that what we all share is actually a parasitical type of sameness. It doesn't make us an individual. It doesn't make us special. That's the funny thing, because the only thing that prevents us from actually being a true individual of the truest sense of the word is actually that spirit, that part of the transcendental, which allows us this I am realization, that self-reflection, and that every human being has. And to one degree or another, to a greater or lesser degree, but the ability to say I am the same as I was yesterday and 10 years ago is that kind of thing that we all share. And this is actually, and that's the funny thing, it's like, oh yeah, I'm so individual. No, the funny thing is, and that spirit, that realization of me makes me an individual. Actually, if I really think about what an individual means like a unique a unique kind of
Right.
process or whatever.
Right.
It's something that shouldn't have that, because I don't share this because this I share with everybody. So only when that kind of like self-reflective I am parasite is expelled or silenced for a while, the true individual emerges, because then you don't have it. And then, like, I don't know, Bataille would use whatever, shocks, sexual, erotic processes, and Clark is the same, and others, in voodoo, we use all kinds of techniques to get into trance and so forth, what it does is, of course, to the I am person dies or drowns or falls asleep or withers away, explodes or implodes, and what arises is the demonic self, that which is truly individual and which has absolutely nothing in common with the transcendental self or with anything that anyone that follows a transcendental path wants to develop. And this is where I part ways with all of the left-hand path people, right-hand path people, who basically all want the same thing, don't realize it even. It just, the one want to merge with some type of, transcendental God being. The other one wants to set themselves up as God, but all in that transcendental realm where self-consciousness and will to power, or the will to power has provided the path to it. So, this is where I completely part ways, and this is why our work is so unique. The realization that transcendence and anything related to it, or the path towards it, the strengthening of that transcendental self is just giving food and power to the parasitical aspect of ourselves, which just will strengthen the paranoia, the control fetishism, the need to dominance, the inability to come to terms with finitude, and the inability to live truly heroic, because the hero is the one who knows that he needs to die eventually, and he has no fear of dying, not because he thinks he's going to be in a paradise later, or because he has, I don't know, done rituals to project his personality into some type of hyperspace where then he rules like the, evil egregore, So, this kind of infantile bullshit is, of course, completely off the record there. But of course, the heroic people live according to a destiny which they perceive and which they pursue actively in liaison with fate. So the ability to live deeply, understand that you are mortal, that you have limits as a human being, that you need to have a type of pact or relationship with the gods, whatever the gods are for you, demonic, enthusing powers, the souls of the world, whatever it is, but that you have to establish a meaningful relationship because they depend on you to renew themselves in the experience of the mortals. Same as you need them in order to fulfill cosmic destiny. If you can do that, you become the most individual being, but not individual in that infantile sense of self-assertion, but individual in the sense that, cosmic destiny becomes fulfilled in your life. And that you do not need any type of and this is what the nihilism that Nietzsche threw us into produced, the realization that the life or the world makes no sense, that there is no good and evil, that there is no moral agenda, that life doesn't provide a certain humanly conceptual or understandable meaning. And this is why we have to look for it. Before God gave us the meaning, like live a meaningful life and you will be raised and you will be my child or something. And suddenly we have to create our own meanings. And then we create these ersatz religions, ersatz philosophies. But the ecstatic embrace of meaninglessness is what I propose, that life has no other meaning than ecstatic enjoyment and a type of task to care for the world, care for others, establish rapport with the enthusing powers so that you yourself become again an enthusing power. Because of course, as a demonic self, we have enthusing powers of our own, which impacts others. So if we understand that web of relationships, our life can become not meaningful in that laughable moral sense, but it becomes deep, it becomes intense, it becomes profound. And I think some poets kind of like understood that. And, you know, even if you read people like Artaud or, you know, Clark is, but these people, you know, even when they used, or Alfred Schuller, you know, when they used Nero, or even some of these horrific or supposedly Elagabal horrific figures, you know, it wasn't about them living morally good lives. It was about living ecstatically. And sometimes, you know, and that's the dangerous message for, I guess, you know, moralists, humanists, and other ideologists. Sometimes this deep ecstatic life can also not be a good life in that moral sense, can be a dangerous life, can be also immoral, you know?
Yep.
So it can be people who do not have considerations of a moral good and evil kind of way. You have to live beyond good and evil, but not because you are a cruel, self-asserted leader, but because you live according to your cosmic destiny, which incarnates or manifests when you live openly and with patience, and hear what the cosmos has to say. That's my conviction. And that does not usually then make you a pathological person, because these pathological person, really cruel people who have a pathology of cruelness, are also are very unbalanced types who I don't think live in any way in a possibly pathic openness. But what I mean is more to make it very clear is like, you know, when you see these old Germanic sagas or heroes, you know, where sometimes, you know, the tragic hero knows that his destiny is he fights for a certain king, and maybe the king is a cruel tyrant, you know, but then he, you know, accepts his destiny as a great hero, and he has to fight for that king against the other great heroes, like, you know, like when the Greeks fought Troy, right? Where, you know, in the end, the heroes all respected each other, even if they were on opposing sides. But it was not about what side you were fighting for. You know, it wasn't not, oh, your king is not a moral guy, so, you know, fighting from his. No, it was every person was judged according to his heroic predisposition. Do you accept or don't you accept your charge in that moment of time? And that kind of thinking appeals to me. You know, where you're, yeah.
I'm sorry, no, you have maybe three thoughts actually based on this last thing. One is funny. I mean, of all people, Joseph Campbell actually has said that this kind of a thing, where he had said, somebody, I think Bill Moyers had asked him, he said, what do you think the meaning of life is? He said, there is no meaning to life. We're just seeking an experience of being alive. Right. And that, which is basically like that. I mean, people who have seen that, that sort of encapsulates that.
Yes, I think when we say, I think what also it does, it manifests, however, a certain type of ethos. You know, it when you live this type of life, I do believe it compels you to, let's say, care for the earth, because you care for what you encounter, because you allow it to be itself, and you do not need to control it or like organize it, violate it in order to assert dominance. So I think, you know, when we talk about this type of, let's call it a heroic life, and this is, you know, the heroic life means only to accept your, you know, your historicity and, you know, your transience. But it will compel you to have a certain relationship with your world. And that is never really exploitative per se. It's never an exploitation, because exploitation gives us an advantage on that, you know, profound, big level.
Well, it's about control again.
Right. So, you know, I think it also, if more people would live like that, it would make life probably a little bit more pleasant, you know, in a sense. Even from that moral level, I guess, you know.
Just on it, but one of my thoughts came back to me. One of the things is, because we were talking about the soul, and one of the things you mentioned is about the demonic nature of the soul. or daemonic, really. Which again, could you just sort of a side note, explain what you mean by that? Because I know what you mean by that, but I'm not sure if everybody would.
Right,
so.
of course. Good you're asking, because of course what I don't mean is like this an infantile idea of demon, like, whoa, demon,
Right.
is the evil soul. And and I'm so happy our like our badass soul, our evil soul is kind of, this of course immediately throw overboard. When I say demonic, I mean with the ability to enthuse. I mean the non-human, the way we understand human. When we encounter and when we basically impact on people today, because everybody is so insulated, we do this with our rational, self-conscious personality that we have constructed. We have constructed our personality, of course, by interacting with other human beings and shaping our idea of self by interacting with others, right? So it's also a very inauthentic self very often, right? It's an artificial construction of who we are. Because it's of course that self-reflective I, which only knows itself by how it deconstructs others that he or she encounters, right? Obviously. So the demonic I is that type of constantly becoming true self, let's say it. And when I say true self, I don't want people to have any type of thelemic idea of what it means, So I try to avoid it, because of
true
thelemites. I know a lot of nice thelemites and everything, but it's not what I mean. But true self, our primordial self, basically arises, which is unhindered by the fetters of rational, deconstructive, self-reflective thought. And when this type of personality arises into the forefront, it's a type of enthused personality, because in that moment it's enthused by the all. It's enthused by the cosmos. It is not something that is insulated and trying to control and deconstruct, but at this moment we are a type of fullness. We are a type of overflowing, a type of child of a mating of two souls, of the impacting soul that has created that moment of intoxication that allowed our profane self to crumble, our spiritual self to crumble, and in that moment, that other self, that pregnant, enthused self, that is drunk of the cosmos, erupts to the forefront. And this type of self, or this type of true becoming, that one actually is, that type of non-static entity is something that acts and impacts in a completely different way than our profane self would. And the experiences we have during those moments, and of course in our lives, such profound moments where we have a truly demonic moment in that sense, is very rare. But we can create a type of life where these experiences are put into context and they linger and they can be recalled, because under such situations we create symbols, we create words, we create signs and symbols, whether they are artwork, or whether they are any type of spontaneous, impulsive reaction to that from that overcoming that we have experienced. And these symbols then remain doorways to re-enter those states of intoxication and of communion. And of course, we can create by that, what I explained before, by that openness, we can create a life in which that dominance of the spirit is very low or very weak, so that we can remain plugged in, basically, in that cosmic process in a much more profound way, which doesn't mean that in many moments we are completely absorbed by the profane world, and the profane life happens to the greatest of us, including myself very often. So
sure.
But we do not get lost in it. That's the point, right? the spirit will always be under control of the soul in most moments. And this is the key. The key is not to expel the spirit, because it's there and it's part of our setup now.
It's there for a reason.
Yes. Well, let's call it like this. It's there for a reason, but maybe it's a bad reason. But it is there, right?
It's a fact. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a fact that it's there. Like we have to, and this is the thing. And I'm not even concerned like how did it get there? These are the typical logocentric questions. I just know it's there.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to understand like when it's there, what we're going to do about it, and how we're going to deal with it. So it's there. And however it went there, we can now create a myth that's more poetic or like some more scientific myth. But I believe that as long as we understand the problem and see what can be done in order to regain a more ensouled life, then the spirit or our insulation towards the cosmic processes and the cosmic reality becomes less and less toxic. And we become in the process less and less anxious and less stressed out on all levels of our lives. And we live a life that's more profound, more deep, more empowered, more erotic on all levels of the word, and not only sexual, obviously, Mm-hmm. And this is, I think, the key to our lives, that the spirit, which allows us also reflective thought, which is not a bad thing per se, which allows us, technology and all of these kind of things, mm-hmm. Is all a good thing, as long as the big picture, that which is truly essential, and truly essential is not to have another great technological invention, to have another rocket, to have another satellite, or to have another micro whatever chip. But if our technological rational mind is not taking over the entire meaning of our lives and the meaning of the world and the way we see the world, to deconstruct the world into a robotic atomic splinter, if that is a process we can avoid, then the spirit can work in, Klages would probably say, in service of the soul, and then it can further this type of ensouled life, and probably even, like in some kind of temples of antiquity, create great buildings, who, instead of brutalizing its environment, maybe even like, bringing out its beauty even more, mm-hmm. So, and that's just simply, I have a friend whom I'm going to see in Croatia, one of my good friends. He's an architect and actually a PhD of architecture. One of my good friends and colleagues in the Cosmic Gnosis, Alan. He's we talk about this a lot, for example, how even the style of building, can either be something that, you have these brutalizing sometimes buildings, which, when you see, they're like sore thumbs, in the landscape, but maybe they're like huge villas, that you have marble everywhere, but they just look like they're brutalizing the landscape. And that's probably even what these people want. They want to make a statement. Look, here I am, and this is my place, and I rule this place. And then there are even sometimes grand structures, who, however, somehow do not fall out of line with the landscape, but they seem to be fitting into the environment in which they are built. Right. Even if they are grand, even if they are big, but they seem to just enhance the glory of the environment in which they stand. Mm-hmm. So this is how I see humanity in a more, and I'm saying the word, in an idealist sense, from my own position. Right. But it's a humanity which co-weaves cosmic destiny, not against the cosmos by asserting itself as the dominant species, but by listening of what the cosmos needs and what humanity can do as its caretaker. Because we have the spirit, and it can be damaging, but it can also be caretaking. And I'm not saying caretaking in that quantitative sense, like a lot of environmentalists today who take care of the cosmos because they're afraid that if we don't, we're all going to die. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. But from a more biocentric position, where we understand that It's the cosmos itself that's important. And we as humans are an integral part of it, but we have a special part because the cosmos comes alive in our experience. And that's even pre-spirit, but even in our soul, like, in our visionary experience, a cow cannot see the stars and the sky, but humans can see it. And even without the soul, even without the spirit, if you undergo an ecstatic experience, you see things, you experience things, but then you don't see the atomized cosmos, but you see something which is left within its embedded nature, to say it in a little bit more flowery way. And when we can do this, when we can expose ourselves more to that, we can become co-weavers of cosmic destiny. We can become caretakers, and which then allows us a more profound life, I would think, and that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in a profound life, a life that is deep, a life, not a life that leaves a lot of legacy. I don't want to write 1 million books or have the greatest name in occultism or any such nonsense, because this is nothing that I aspire to, because I believe that such things are essentially meaningless. But I want to live a deep life for my own sake and the sake of the cosmos. And by doing that, maybe give inspirations to others who then see my life or some of my works as symbols that may or may not, but hopefully may provide a pathway into a similar experience. That's at least my hope.
So, well, actually, okay. So yes, so something else you had mentioned in that it was one of my other, I think I have like two sort of other main questions for you for this one. One of them, we talked about Eros, okay, and the idea of the erotic, which I think does tie very much into this idea of having that kind of experience, that kind of what you call ecstatic experience, or that transported kind of experience. Talk to me about what about the term Eros. Tell me about that.
Well, of course, you mentioned Klage's Cosmogonic Eros. I really, and everybody needs to read this book, because even if especially the first part of the book is very dense, is a little bit difficult, but the second part is not so difficult. It's very, very good. It's about ancestral worship and other sacrifice and other such things. But it's very worth reading and studying. I mean, I've read it 100 times. I'm still reading it very often. It's just amazing. And it actually reintroduces and reestablishes Eros as a cosmogonic force, as an elemental force. So, of course, Eros, in the way I use it, and Klages would use it, and even someone like Bataille would use it, is not, of course, of a little, bow shooting, little boy. Yeah, exactly. That has anything to do with the, making lovers and stuff like this. This is maybe a shallow leftover of what Eros really is, literally a cosmogonic, foundation-shaking force. So in this case, I believe Eros, to make it very quick, Eros to me is the opposite of logos within a more biocentric understanding of the world, where within anthropocentric and logocentric, rational, transcendental world, the logos orders the world from top to bottom, and compels everyone to work their way up towards transcendental spheres and realizations. Eros is a type of force that weaves a kind of an oceanic web of magnetism, which then draws, and we've spoken about it before, we believe that this maternal world is a world of complementaries and polarities that are constantly drawn to each other in all kinds of different configurations. And Eros provides that oceanic web of magnetism which draws the things together. So this is so Eros is a magnetic force without which the cosmos would fall apart, basically. So when we believe that every phenomenal appearance is ensouled, so of course I can have an erotic relationship with a landscape, and I can have an erotic relationship with a tree or another human. But of course, I'm not talking about a simple fetishism or something like this, right? Where I have an erotic relationship with a tree because I don't know,
Because you have a tree fetish.
engage with that tree.
Right. I understand. No, I know what you mean.
A
yes.
painful experience. But but obviously, and then Klages has that very interesting phrase that he uses, the eros of the distance. So this is an eros which this is an eros which is not aimed at possession, is not an eros which then triggers a possessive act, like I want to have this, and then it becomes again an act of domination, like we see in relationships oftentimes, right? You don't really care for, you're in love with a person, and what happens is you want that person to stay the same, like you knew him, like you knew her, and you start to possess them and try to change them and want to, make sure they never leave you, and it becomes a toxic relationship, where the erotic aspect of it has lost its meaning a long, long time ago. So eros, in that sense, means especially the eros of the distance is the ability to, and this of course only happens when we don't have that insulated mind where we want to control, where we allow a natural magnetism to take place, where a natural process of mating can take place, where a seduction happens, where I'm overcome by some type of erotic force, which forces me to abandon myself. And it's always about abandonment. It's always about releasing control to something, to a force, So when I'm sitting there, and I was there, for example, in Latvia just a few days ago, sitting by the beach in the evening, and it was literally like this. I was like lounging in my beach chair, having a drink and looking out. There was no people really, and I was just looking out into the ocean, and there was a dramatic sky, in the sunset. And I was literally intoxicated by that, in a sense, right? The only time I realized I was actually seduced and I was kind of like lost in the moment, that's how this is what everyone understands, was when my friend then just talked something to me, and I was like, snapped out of it, and I'm like, okay, yeah, what did you just say? So that's what I'm talking about. These moments where something seduces you. And interestingly enough, this should also be the evidence that outside forces exist, that the landscape, and even small things like the smallest animal, the smallest flower, has the potential ability to cast a net over you, like seduce you. And this is what you see in the fairy tales, in the sagas. This is when animals start to speak to you, or when plants start to speak to you. The language of the birds. This is the moment of the cosmogonic Eros, when he fuses two things that even for the human rational mind are impossible. For me, the Sphinx, or any of those old demonic figures where, half human, half animal, half human, half plant, are remnants of humanity being able to experience the cosmogonic Eros and have an erotic relationship, a demonic relationship with the cosmos, where the congress between the human and the non-human was completely normal, right? And this created then symbols that basically manifested this experience. So the Eros, the erotic, is the force which allows the non-rational, non-possessive, non-dominating relationship with your environment and other people. It's the force that basically puts you in a type of rapture, which then leads to an overflowing, because you receive, and that's a very, and I think personally it's a very lovely way of thinking about that, right? The inseminating power that overcomes you creates a certain pregnancy inside of you, and that which then happens, that which you then do, what you are compelled to do, your body movement, your sigh, or whatever happens, is a type of division that you experience. That's what you think about when you have these moments when you undergo a possession in voodoo, a real one, or when you have any of these kind of experiences of that nature, of that true nature, and that are not self-induced, which is too often the case in magical rituals by normal practitioners. Most of the time it's self-hypnosis and self-induced experiences. But when it is that type of experience that breaks down your rational mechanisms in which you deal with the world, then what happens is an overflowing, where I think Novalis said, where every step you take, a rose bush is born, because you suddenly create a world, and in the moment of intoxication, you are, and that what you see is the center of the world, and the world is born in that moment, right there, anew, and that is the center of it, and nothing else matters, nothing else exists, and these types of experiences, when one has them more often, they can shape and provide such deep, profound, transformative experiences that one really never is going to be the same. And people try to recreate this by taking ayahuasca and all kinds of other things and psychedelic drugs. And of course, they can help you to have a certain experience, obviously, but it remains fractured if it is not embedded into a very, very clear understanding of why you're doing that. And here we need, because we live in a world of the spirit and of the rational mind and of concepts, we have to first understand what the problem is. And if we do not then embed it, and we we have to take the same route back that we have taken in our evolution, in that sense, right? So if these things remain just fractured experiences by the help of drugs or by excess, it's not at all the same. No. So they can, a person. I lived in Brazil. I lived in Africa very many years, and so on. And I tried all these things, and I engaged with a lot of these traditions. And of course, it's a completely different thing when a initiated tribal person takes any kind of natural mind-enhancing drug, because he lives in a biocentric universe where you don't have to tell him, those I don't know, Western proponents of those types of drugs, like, well, yeah, this is a spirit, ayahuasca is a spirit, oh yeah, peyote is a spirit, but it remains nothing but a concept in their head. Yeah, okay, right. It's a spirit, great, you declare it that. But for a biocentric person, it's experience that is spirit, and that's a greater difference that you can't even imagine.
Oh, absolutely.
To declare one thing and to experience one thing is a completely different thing. And this is what I hope, and I see some of those people, those researchers, they try to understand further, right? They understand that, of course, if you take such kind of a mind-enhancing drug or do whatever in the forest, with these entities, or you do a ritual in the forest, it's totally different who does it. Even we both have mind-altering experiences, but the one that lives in a biocentric cosmos has a completely different experience of what is going on, while the other person, maybe brings a lot of self-projected wishes and needs and agendas with it,
Oh yeah, and worldview makes all the difference.
I have an agenda. I want to go to Peru to, I don't know, have a great cosmic experience, and then that's my wish. And then you bring it all in. So you don't let the spirit of ayahuasca be itself and overcome you, because you go into it with preconceived notions of what you need to find.
And what's going to be, right?
And what's going to be like. And so then you're going to be disappointed, or it's going to blow your mind because it's much better than I thought. So, however, you always kind of try to keep control and, expect certain things, and you do not have that openness that I spoke about. And that makes a complete difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, okay. It's very, so we're talking about this. We're talking about this this sort of biocentric worldview, and and this erotic experience. I think the one last thing I had wanted to ask you about, because I know we've been running we're having a great thing,
great conversations.
We're having a great, yeah. Right? This is it's like, this is really interesting, the whole thing. So something you alluded to earlier, and that I had sort of a question about, but I don't necessarily want to ask it in the way that I have it. It's, we were talking about passivity or passive sort of acceptance of reality and the way that it is. And one of the things you talked about in the Cult of the Black Cube, you have a section where you were talking about the Saturnian currents, because of course, we haven't even gotten into the whole idea of Saturn as its connection to chaos and so forth. But one of the things that you had mentioned there was that, at least among some esoteric practitioners, that there is a difficulty with this, this sort of very maternal idea that comes out of this kind of erotic coupling thing that goes on, or at least certainly the feminine aspects of that seem to be a problem for a lot of these groups. Now, it's quite possible, really, in what you've said, that you may have answered that to some degree, but I'm just wondering if you have any other thing to say about that. Yeah,
I think it's important because, and the funny thing is, that problem also pertains to a lot of these practitioners who today champion, I don't know, Babylon and all these female goddesses. You would think they're the exact opposite. They're absolutely not, because my idea of all of this, and I think when we talk about just to rewind it just a little bit, when we talk about the Saturnian, what I wrote in this essay in the Black Cube, it's actually, it doesn't really matter if we use like the Saturnian lens. What I was trying to do is explain basically some of the most important symbols and tendencies of the Cosmic Gnosis, but using a Saturnian lens. So basically, that's what it was, and so basically, a lot of the stuff that we talked about goes into the same direction, just not using Saturnian terminology or terminology of a Saturnian worldview or whatever,
right.
The way I see it, and of course, I see it very differently from many other people. So, I believe that, So the divine feminine, it's a big thing these days, and it's massively misunderstood. And I think you talked about it a lot with Jessica, which was great. I loved the podcast with Jessica Grota. Not only because she's my good spiritual friend and Theion partner, but she has a lot of important things to say on that. But I believe, it's an important question, the idea of the divine feminine, and how the divine feminine basically has left the stage in our current world experience. And of course, the divine feminine for me is a very important and also another complex matter, which is not adequately dealt with most of those practitioners today who, let's say, subscribe to a goddess a theory, or who worship goddesses because they want the divine feminine to return. Because what they most often do is they do not ascribe at all to a maternal or feminine way of experiencing the world, but of course remain in a logocentric mindset and believe that by championing female goddesses and, let's say, women powers like, I don't know, emancipation and so forth, they are actually subscribing to feminine worldview or something like this, which of course is not the case. If we try to analyze what really the consequences of a maternal birth of the cosmos are. So that said, as I said before, these social issues of emancipation and equal pay and oppression of women is something that's very important, need to be dealt with, something that I feel strongly about. But just by championing these things, you do not experience the world according to a worldview or a world experience which was triggered by a birthed cosmos, which gave rise to the divine feminine having a very prominent place. And I think you mentioned it in the beginning somewhere that, of course, I personally think the maternal worldview, or the Pelasgian worldview, or a worldview which is based on a birthed world, does not give preference in a very strong sense to masculine or feminine, boys or girls, male or female, but it understands the necessities of complementaries, of polarity. And when we speak about the divine feminine in that non-human sense, is not related to physical women and physical boys per se. It could mean, of course, that women, because they participate in the mysteries of, let's say, birth, potentially, but doesn't have to be actually, and because they are symbols of something that gave birth to a world, a world experience. If they become symbols of this, they also, of course, have important places in society. And of course, that is why you find great priestesses and important people in these societies which subscribe to such a type of worldview. I believe that in the transition to a more patriarchal structures and thinking, what we see is the intrusion of the spirit, which then takes hold, especially in the masculine, if we want to call it that, in the masculine attributes of activity, dominance, Uranian tendencies,
yep.
Which then would be considered then rational thinking and so forth. That these kind of things, Alfred Schuler actually had this interesting image where he says, well, there is that idea of the cell, and he uses biological model, like there's the cell in which electrons kind of like erotically intermingle, male and female, and they erotically intermingle. And then there was a time when this spirit intruded, where then the male aspects started to rape and oppress the female electrons, in a sense, right? Wow. So then a certain type of unbalance started to happen. Then what happens is that in our experience of the world, we started to become less and less able to receive, to conceive. The ability of pregnancy, which was, of course, something that all humans could experience, not in a physical way, of course, because that only a biological female can, but of course, in the sense of experiencing and receiving the demonic outside, and then becoming impregnated by that experience and giving birth. That was something that all humans can do. But when we, and women, of course, were symbols of that birthing process. So, and you must spin this further philosophically, and it becomes very clear, in my opinion. However, then, when the spirit intruded and took hold, basically, of that male aspect of the human setup, we became withdrawn from that passivity, from the pathic, from the tragic, from that was which we consider to be a Chthonic experience. And sorry,
okay,
Jessica, I have to cut this off.
Yes.
And what happened was then, of course, the process towards rationalization, the degradation of what the female aspect of our world experience would stand for, were trampled into the dust, disrespected, and overpowered by that which we consider to be a male aspect. So rather than the male receiving sovereignty from the goddess, and the female that passes him as, let's say, the representative of the goddess, the scepter of power, because he, as the active dominant agent, would rule, no longer took place. So the loss of the mutually dependent, the loss of mutual dependency, which is actually the seal of this maternal birthed world, where the complementaries must interact and are of equal importance, must mutually infuse each other. This kind of idea became lost, and this kind of experience became lost. So this is how one was traded for the other. And the unbalances ripped the world experience apart, in my opinion. And what we see now, the insulation, the world of will to power, dominance, where pathic experience, where poets and introverted people, and I'm saying introvert, I don't mean sociophobic people, which is another weak excuse for being lame. Where I mean, like introverted people who seem to be withdrawn or sensitive are considered to be weaklings, especially when they're men. They're considered to be weaklings or this or that. And this is something, of course, which is very telling of how we see the world and how we experience the world. So when I say the divine feminine to me is, of course, the reminder that the world needs that type of pathic experience, needs the type of ability to become pregnant, needs the ability to be open. Everything that the goddesses as basically manifestors of life and also of wrath against, and usually they are goddesses of wrath against people who violate life, violate the natural life. These type of female energies or female goddesses are vitally necessary and must play a huge role, of course, in our recapturing of the biocentric cosmos. But what it cannot lead to, of course, is to trade male dominance for female dominance, trying to kind of like, make social issues metaphysical issues. But what we have to try is to recapture a world experience which then automatically will provide, at least in those people that live that, will provide a certain type of balance between, male and female, and where also, interestingly, is static ideas of male and female also vanish. Men don't have to be manly in that certain sense. Women don't have to be girly and Barbie in a certain sense, because these kind of concepts don't apply. Anything on the scale between male and female is possible because the polarities and the intermingling takes place on all levels. So this is also, of course, a worldview which allows for all kinds of fluidity in gender, because the hardcore division of gender is a result of that loss of the divine feminine, where one certain dominant worldview and experience is prominent and one is traded against the other. And the atomization of humanity also is manifested in, of course, strict gender roles and norms, rather than understanding that we're all made of male and female aspects.
Yep.
And they may or may not come through a certain way, right?
Right.
So, but if you understand all of this right, this takes the wind out of all ideological sails. However, if we deeply live this type of experience, the birthed world, which creates humanity and every other phenomenal appearance, and all have rights, all have a certain type of right to be there, and all are related to each other in a fundamental way as demonic powers, and all these demonic powers can interact. And the freedom, for example, in our esoteric group, there are some rituals which we do, and some type, and even in voodoo this is the case, you receive, after a certain type of initiation, you receive a type of a headdress or a hat, something to protect your head. But it's also a sign of the eggshells, when the world broke out of the eggshells, and to wear the hat or to wear that kind of headdress is a sign of freedom before the martyr, is where everyone is equal, where there is no master and no slave, where, and this is no humanism, where everybody is equal because of certain traits, we are all of this, or we are, but it's a fundamental right, because you are a son of the martyr, and not, a son of Rome or a son of whatever,
Right.
son of this or that person. So, the sense of a certain type of equality, the sense of the respect for the other, the type of erotic intermingling of complementaries. This is the true essence of the maternal world, not the domination of one against the other, not asserting of power and dominance and sovereignty based on anxiety and the will to power, which is the masculine gone mad, basically.
Right.
However, so the spirit is the intruding cause, but it has kidnapped and blinded the masculine into becoming its agent more than the female aspects. And that is why a lot of groups still assign negative tendencies towards women. They say the women are the seducers, they take us away from the transcendental. The women, so oftentimes it's true, because oftentimes women are not as strongly overcome by the spirit. You know, I work much better with women in many ways because women are not so strongly abstract, drawn out of the world, because they do undergo periods, menstruation, right? They do undergo potentially childbirth. They are by nature related to the chthonic processes, you know, in more fundamental ways than I, as a biological male, could even imagine. So this already, of course, in a world that has rendered the female dangerous, because it embodies at some level that biocentric world in a more fundamental sense maybe than some of the male, which has been more you know, blinded by the spirit because of its male aspects being dominant now even more. Then, of course, we understand how the fear of the divine feminine has taken hold of all kinds of cultures, and where, of course, a lot of groups, of course, nowadays to be acceptable, and of course now to be more on vogue. Of course, they're trying to change this, but they don't try to change this based on deep understanding of the matter, but they just change this randomly by wanting to appeal to a modern you know, feminist or female-centric movement. They don't understand the deep implications of why these things actually happen, and nothing changes just because you say now we love the feminine more, and now we don't think the feminine is I don't know, a kind of a dead weight that drags us down to, I don't know, you know, the swamp, you know, the sexual swamp or something, because the overall movement, but now the female are included. Hey, look, you know, now you also have the chance to move with us towards the transcendence, you know, to the you know, lofty realms, where we can leave all the chthonic nonsense behind and all the dead weight and all the transient changing processes of the world. This is when the Gnostics would say the female has to become male, right? That's my interpretation of that, right? So, however, then, you know, they lend a hand like, hey, you know, you can be male, and that's okay. We show you how to do that. And we can do this all together. So, however, of course, this is completely beside the point, because the point is actually not to go up there in some kind of transcendent fantasy world, which not only men, but also females have created. The world we have created is not, and this is, again, I have to drive this home, is not the bad men that have done this. The spirit is in all of us. And even in women, the male aspects have become completely dominant. So even if you're the most girly looking girl, you know, and you are the most, I don't know, emancipated freedom fighter for female rights, you know, it could be that you're a completely logocentric person doing that because you're a hardcore ideologist or something. You don't embody the maternal world in that fundamental sense. You don't embody a biocentric world, because also in your organism, the female aspects have become taken hostage.
Well, right? They're as degraded by females as they are by men.
Exactly. So it's not a matter, we're all human. It's not a matter of man against woman. It's a matter of our inner female aspects being oppressed by our male aspects. And however, in the outer world, oftentimes women have become the symbols for that danger of our inner female powers, which of course threaten the transcendental extraction, that the spirit wants us to undergo. And male have become the symbol of, God the Father, of that positive process that each individual needs to undergo, transcending, right? So this is the key to this. It's not male against women, women are being oppressed, blah, blah, blah. This is just an external result, an exoteric result of some of those processes that happen on the inner, the evacuation of the female substance from the individual human individual cell. That's the problem. And this happens to everybody. And the loss of the goddesses, the respect that the goddesses commanded by being the guardians of that maternal biocentric world, and where the male basically was the protector and basically only the wielder of the power that has been received by the goddesses, and the goddesses are not women in that profane sense. And this is also what we have. We cannot confuse these things, right? They are symbols of a reality. They are symbols of a way to relate to the world. And this is what the goddesses are, enthusing powers who relate us to a world. And this is when we understand that, then we can reintegrate the loss of the feminine, or we can reintegrate the feminine so the loss of the feminine is stopped, and we can regain that kind of experience for which the feminine is crucial, and in some way ontologically prior, let's call it, to the male. And this is where the exalted position, in my opinion, and probably of Klages and Bachhofen in a reverse, if you put them upside down, come from, that the exaltation of the goddess takes place because she symbolizes this world that is creates and provides the deepest meaning of life, as in no meaning at all, but it provides depth of experience. It allows for tragedy, but this tragedy is not bad. This tragedy is beautiful because this flaring up and dying, to rise like a comet in a supernova, not because you achieve fame and great status, but because you live so deeply and you love life so much. So it's not the will to power, it's the will to live, is the love to live deeply, which I consider and I connect with the goddesses most and foremost. That this is the image which they provide for me, and this is my guiding motive for my entire work. And the reinstitution of the divine feminine will allow us to embrace the tragic life and see that it's precisely this tragedy which allows us to live life the most deepest.
Great. That's great. I don't even know if I have anything to add to that, because that's just very, very well said about, because that is exactly it. I think that hits the nail on the head about, this is not about this is not about any kind of external kinds of social or gender.
No, there's no conflict between men and women, except of course, when women of course have to struggle for their equalities and stuff like this. But it's an inner struggle that unfortunately also has exoteric consequences,
because what goes on in here gets put out there, right, exactly,
in patriarchal societies and so forth. So, but we have to watch out that we do not tip the other side,
right, exactly. Suddenly, this is not
men are becoming emasculated, and so oftentimes I see that the cooperation between men and women do not happen, because now women say, like, all men are toxic, all men are rapists, all men are bad, all men are this is ridiculous. So when we must understand that it is not about men against women or whatever, but it's obviously about reintegrating certain things back into our lives, which then makes a relationship much more harmonious. And that we have problems with each other as men and women, or lovers or whatever, has to do with possessiveness and other kind of control freak mechanisms that are not based on the Eros of the distance, where we allow someone to remain in its fleetingness, and we can appreciate even when they spiral out of our orbit, because that magnetism is no longer there. But we do not want this. We want to control, and we want to keep people around, and we want them to be exactly like we want them to be. So this must stop. You know?
Absolutely.
So yeah, lots of stuff.
Wow.
I guess we would never finish, but I think we actually did speak about very important things, and I hope people understand the magnitude of it, and how tangible it is, how it impacts on every. This is my big agenda, that people understand that this is like literally a struggle of huge magnitudes, but that actually that everyone in themselves are within that struggle and fighting that battle, whether they know it or not. And that it's very tangible. It's every day in everyone's life, and it's something that must be addressed and should be addressed by everyone.
Absolutely.
To live a deeper life. Simple as that.
Exactly, and that's what I said. And I would, I would totally agree. Absolutely, and that's the whole. That is the whole. That's the whole point of my own work as well. So we're working in different ways, but in tandem, but very close.
Absolutely, we understand each other. Yes, absolutely.
So, well, David, did you have any other final thoughts? Because we've talked about a lot. So
we talked. No, well, I think actually we summed it up very well. I mean, we went through a lot of things, and I think if people, that people don't need to grasp basically all the concepts we've thrown out, but I would like to say, without further, my main agenda is to speak to the soul. So if something moved you, if something kind of clicked with you in a deeper way, then that's what I wanted to achieve, basically, rather than to explain a lot of concepts which also are important to understand in our world that we live in, but more importantly is that type of undercurrent which I try to convey, which speaks to a deeper layer rather than the mind. And I hope some people got something out of this on any level. So that's my hope.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording in a minute if you want to just stay on for a second, but I just want to say thanks again for being here. This was really great. And it's so for those who are listening, till we have next conversation next month.
Thank you for listening to Chthonia Conversations. If you would like to become a supporter of the work that I do at Chthonia, please visit patreon.com/Chthonia and consider becoming a patron. The different levels and the different benefits of each level are described there. If you are interested at all in personal one-on-one coaching, tarot readings, or other kinds of sessions, please visit my website, liminalreiki.com. The name has changed to Transition Life Coaching, but still retains the original Liminal Reiki logo and URL. So you may check that out if that interests you. All of my work is available with publishing, podcasts, and also teaching. Scholars of the Borderland, which is where I provide classes on myth, religion, and other subjects. You can visit that and find all information about that at chthonia.net. If you don't follow me on social media, I'm Chthonia Podcast. 2 words on Facebook, 1 word on Twitter and Instagram, and just Chthonia on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, check in, give a comment if you like, and hopefully I will see you again in the next episode.